New York City, arguably the epicenter of the world. One famous song goes that if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. And it's true. Those that make it really big. It's the richest city in the world with a total wealth of $2.7 trillion, 113 billionaires, and 25,000 people with ultra-high net worth. But the coronavirus pandemic has rocked the city. At one point, the fatality rate was about 10% and over 30% for those hospitalized. In April, nearly 1 out of every 3 New Yorkers was out of work, and total consumer spending was down by over 40%. The tourism industry, which supported almost 400,000 jobs and generated almost $70 billion in 2019, came to a screeching halt. Shootings and murders skyrocketed.
When we talk about economic recovery, rich people don't need a recovery. They're actually richer right now than they were before. The best case to make for New York is invest in the bottom.
The consequences are a potential budget shortfall of at least $30 billion in the next few years. While the area will be getting nearly $24 billion in federal aid soon, state and local officials say that that's not enough.
Good morning, all.
Raising taxes on the wealthy is one part of Governor Cuomo's proposal.
If you raised income taxes, the top rate, which is currently...
It would make New York the area with the highest state and local income tax in the nation.
Most successful New Yorkers are doing great, and asking them to pay more is very appropriate. But I think there is a balance that one has to maintain.
If you need that iceberg to melt faster and faster, and the next thing you know, a big chunk of the tax base has fallen off and floated away.
In general, migration declines with income. If the rich really just wanted to find a low tax place to live, they've had generations to figure out how to make it work.
You then have to cut dramatically.
Another part of this proposal is to cut Medicaid and school spending.
Cutting public services is a very dangerous thing to do, both economically, politically, and also morally. Those actually do drive people to leave the city.
Between January and December of 2020, about 93,000 more people left the city than moved in. That's not that much considering New York City's total population is 8.3 million. But those that left brought $34 billion in personal income with them.
Is this the collapse of New York City or any other city? No, it's not. There's so much that New York has to offer. But is it a serious challenge that policymakers need to be grappling with right now? Yes, it is.
Watching the city go through this crisis has been really difficult. I was born here and I've spent half of my career here. We spoke to experts to find out what some of the challenges are and the potential path to recovery. Economists often refer to post-recession recoveries with a letter, L, U, V, or a W. A V is the ideal, meaning the economy fell sharply, but then will also rise sharply. The coronavirus pandemic has introduced something we haven't seen before, the K, meaning that a portion of the economy recovers like the V. In this case, those who worked from home were able to save and benefit from a sharp rise in asset values. Some corporations did very well too. For others, the pandemic has been quite the opposite. In 2020, 662,000 jobs were lost, and bankruptcies surged by 40%. Leading industries like hospitality, entertainment, food service, or travel were completely shut down. Unemployment in the city is at 13.1%, and even higher for those below the poverty line.
What New York City and New York State needs to do is actually spend money right now. And they could spend money building affordable housing, rebuilding the roads, rebuilding the bridges, and all those things are going to put people back to work. Cutting corners is guaranteed to backfire.
First, I'm championing $1 billion in cash relief for the extremely poor. Then I've proposed trying to get high-speed internet to the 29% of New York City residents who don't have it. And I proposed a People's Bank to help reduce the proportion of New Yorkers that are unbanked and underbanked.
On the fiscal side, the city initially projected a budget shortfall of $8.33 billion for fiscal year 2021. But a mid-year review in February of 2021 showed that a better-than-projected revenue from income and from corporate taxes is looking to generate a surplus of nearly $3.4 billion. In the medium term, the outlook is not as good. The city is projecting a $15.6 billion deficit for fiscal year 2022 through 24, mainly due to a decline in property tax collections. For the state, Governor Cuomo is estimating a $15 billion deficit for just fiscal year 2022.
Policymakers should not overreact to the revenue shortfall they have right now. It's not very significant. For all of the concerns about a revenue decline in New York, tax collections were down about 1% last year. That's well within the state's ability to cover. Now, the state's expenses keep going up, so flatline revenue is still a challenge for the state because those expenses keep rising. But nonetheless, this is manageable.
Regardless, city and state officials are feeling the pressure. There are a number of proposals for the road ahead. President Biden's American Rescue Plan, signed on March 12th, includes nearly $24 billion to the various levels of the New York government. Of that, $6 billion will go to the city.
When you look at the wealthiest people in the city and the wealthiest people in the state, their wealth increased $88 billion, right? So the deficit is not kind of arbitrary. The deficit is a failure of city and state policy to tax the wealthy that are gaining the most from the economy and reinvest it into the rest of the economy so that they can see some gains as well.
We don't really have data. We do have a lot of anecdotal evidence right now that the wealthy are leaving high-tax cities and states during COVID.
If they leave, there's a huge fiscal crisis. How do you pay for all of these services? And that affects everyone. The people who stay either have a higher tax burden or will receive fewer government services. So there's a real question that policymakers need to address right now. How do you keep these people here? How do you make sure that post-pandemic they want to come back?
We're moving to a virtual world in which people have choices. The city has got to figure out that these folks are not the enemy.
In 2018, the top 1% made up 42.5% of total income tax collected by the city, according to the Independent Budget Office. That was $5 billion in revenue for the city. In January, Cuomo proposed a top tax rate increase of up to 2 percentage points.
New York is probably the best place in the entire planet, potentially, to get really, really rich. And taxes is not even the priority. Studies have shown that we could probably increase our taxes 60 to 70%. And at the end of the day, the millionaire flight that would happen would be overshadowed by all of the money, right? The state would still show, the city would still show a net positive in revenues.
In addition to New York State's top tax rate of 8.82%, the city levies its own income tax, which can be as much as 3.876%. According to the Tax Foundation's calculations, New York is the third most expensive state to live and do business in. CNBC does a similar ranking, but it looks at the state's attractiveness for business. On that list, the state ranks 27th.
New York City has a very high municipal income tax. And if people are not physically working there, New York City doesn't get that revenue. So as those Midtown Manhattan offices empty out, so do the city's coffers. We can ask the fundamental questions about what sort of society we want, what sort of tax treatment we want. We also have to just grapple with economic realities, which is there is a tipping point at which people will leave.
Income taxes are just one part of the story. New York City depends even more heavily on property taxes. According to a report by the Real Estate Board of New York, investment and residential property sales were down 46% in 2020. That meant a $1.6 billion loss in revenue for the city and state combined. But there's some indication of recovery. January 2021 was a huge month with sales worth $6 billion, nearly 40% up from January of 2020.
As taxes slump because values are down, the city, instead of making tough decisions about its own budget, will simply seek to raise rates or to target higher taxes on the remaining value, on the remaining landlords, and on the remaining businesses and high-earning individuals in the city to make up for the loss and create kind of a vicious cycle in which they push away people and businesses and lose more.
The fear of high-income earners leaving cities or states because of high taxes is common among lawmakers and experts alike.
It's very intuitive. What we know about millionaires in general is they're well known to avoid taxes and have, there's sort of this income defense industry of accountants and lawyers and wealth managers who are helping them reduce their tax burden. And so this fits in with the idea of millionaire tax flight.
Young says that while there are anecdotes, the data doesn't support it. He's been analyzing tax returns of the wealthy for over a decade.
2.4% of millionaires a year change their state of residency. 1 in 8 of those moves is chasing lower taxes. So we've got a small fraction of a small fraction. This amounts to like 0.3% of the millionaire population that's moving for tax purposes.
A straight tax increase on the rich is not the only option. Others, like the city's independent budget office, have proposed a mixture that would both cut costs and raise revenue.
The reason you don't see like something approaching an exodus in the wake of this is that the value proposition, as it's often put, of New York hasn't been completely destroyed necessarily. I think a lot of really high income, high earning people would in fact probably prefer to live in New York, prefer the lifestyle of New York, if they could be assured that it was coming back.
This is not the first time that New York City experienced a major downturn. In fact, the city has a long history of them. From the 1918 flu pandemic and the Great Depression to 9/11 and the 2008 recession, each time critics have proclaimed the end of the city, and each time they've been wrong.
The mayor who guided New York City through its greatest crisis is Fiorello LaGuardia. He was the mayor of the city during the Great Depression and World War II. He worked in a time when the federal government was willing and ready to invest lots of money in its cities. But in the decades after World War II, over time, the idea of the federal government supporting New York City was no longer in fashion.
In the 1960s, the working poor thrived in New York City. There was a free public hospital system, free university tuition at City University of New York schools, a large public housing system, cheap and reasonable subway service, and generous salaries for public service workers. But the services, well, they weren't cheap. And by 1975, the city was plagued by a fiscal crisis. It was a time of rising conservatism, and the city became a symbol of what was wrong with big government.
By giving a federal guarantee, we would be reducing rather than increasing the prospects that the city's budget will ever be balanced.
President Ford denied federal aid, and banks forced city officials into an austerity program that cut social services. Now, the city avoided a bankruptcy, but historian Philip Svein argues that the austerity measures transformed the city's politics, its character, and its demographics forever.
And in certain ways, the development of the city became much more geared toward the idea that you have to craft city policy with an eye towards retaining and attracting wealthy residents, businesses, and doing whatever you can to make sure that they stay here.
I would say that in the 90s, if you were going to be a top flight employee of a first tier firm, you had to work in New York City. It's what I would call the network effect. And I would say today, that proposition has changed dramatically.
From 1977 to 1997, the top tax rate on earned income more than halved. The state's gross domestic product exploded, and the wealthy got substantially wealthier while the poor became poorer.
That's a development that played out over the 80s, 90s, and the past 20 years of the 2000s. Many of the crises that we've seen in the city, they've affected people very differently depending on where they are in the economic structure.
In the years following the Great Recession, New York City experienced its strongest expansion in decades. This time, though the economy is in shambles, the state and city's fiscal situation are looking better than previous downturns, and not as bad as initially predicted. And the fact that Americans in general have more savings than ever before bodes well for recovery.
If all of these people felt some assurance that the city was going to rapidly get moving again, and that the city and state were not going to clobber really prosperous, profitable businesses with even higher taxes, I think it would be the outlook would be more positive and optimistic. But right now, I think it's just we're in an atmosphere of great uncertainty.
Public services need to be protected and expanded to deal with crises such as the pandemic. Those are actually, I think, much more important in driving people out of New York, or could be more important than tax increases.
Manageable by historical standards, what sets this pandemic apart is the unprecedented uncertainty. Short term, that means the speed in which the vaccine will be widely available and the arrival of federal aid. Long term, it will depend on whether the city is able to retain its agglomeration economics. That could be at risk if work from home policies are sustained.
You know, we've heard this story for thousands of years, and the cities always endure. We've had plagues before, and the cities came back. New York has proven resilient. It will continue to, but that doesn't mean that everything will be normal.
We're going to need all hands on deck because the gravity of this crisis is very, very real. And there is no guarantee that New York City just comes back the way we want it to.
They say New York is dead, still I can't bring myself to leave it. I've been trying to stop the bleeding alone, bleeding alone. I wish we'd never met.